Well, greetings. This is Michael Swain, Executive Director of 4SA, and we're bringing you one of our regular interviews, which we believe and trust will be very helpful to you. This one is on a matter that lies very close to the heart of home, which is parental rights. Now, many parents take it for granted that they, you, me, have the right and the responsibility to care for the well-being and the best interest of our own children. But this understanding and this right is actually increasingly under attack around the world as alternative views and ideologies start to gain the backing of governments. So what we're going to do this morning and in this interview is to look at what parental rights entail, why they're important, how they are under attack in South Africa, and what 4SA is planning to do to protect them. So I have my two wonderful colleagues with me today to supply their expertise and brilliance. 4SA's legal consultant, Nobukosi Zulu, and our head of legal, Liesl Pretorius. So let's kick this thing off right away. And I think let's just set the framework for it. Nobu, what are parental rights? Where do they come from? And why are they so important?
Thanks, Michael. I think in order for us to understand what are parental rights, we need to first have a basic framing of the way in which human rights and rights stem from. And there are different types of laws that exist among us. And a key right that exists are what are called natural rights. These rights are not bestowed by any human authority. They're universal, they're unchanging, and they are simply recognized, and they tend to reflect the basic moral order of society. And one of these most basic natural rights are parental rights. The government doesn't give parents rights to be parents. Parents simply are. You have the right to be a parent just by virtue of having had children, especially if it's in a biological sense. And so this type of parental right, it just stems from the relationship between a mother and a child, or a father and a child. And these rights give parents the authority and the responsibility to nurture children in society. The parental rights are not limited. They include, making educational decisions, what type of religious convictions your children will have, medical decisions for your children, where your children will stay, what clothes they will wear, what hairstyles they can have, what food they can eat, what diets they can have. Basically, anything. If you are born in a vegan home, your parents may believe that being a vegan is what's important, and that's they pass on that's part of their rights as parents. It's not for the state to interfere or intervene unless there is a danger or parents are unwilling to exercise those rights. And why parental rights are important generally is because children exist in families, right? So when a child is born, they're born into a family. And parental rights are the space, they create that environment for which children can thrive, which is in the family context. They have somebody that takes care of them, that can pass on family values. And we know that society requires all of this for us to thrive. The family unit, when it is weakened, results in a weakened society. If children are at odds with their parents, they tend to be at odds with society. If children are at odds with their family structure, they tend to be at odds with the world around them. And so parental rights, they are experienced in a private space, which is in the family home, but their actual benefit is for society. And the way in which the government protects these rights extends beyond the home and into public spaces. And so that's basically what parental rights are.
So essentially, therefore, the duty of the state is to actually uphold and to reinforce the rights of parents to look after and care for and nurture and raise their own children up to be good citizens. That is the role of the state in this context. But let me ask you maybe another question, because we're obviously concerned about religious freedom, freedom of religion in South Africa. Our name says it all. We fight for faith and freedom. So why are parental rights a religious freedom concern?
I think parental rights are a religious freedom concern because one of the most basic tenets rather one of the most basic experiences that a parent gets is to pass on their religion to their children. It is a well-recognized human right to be able to do that so that children can grow up in society and culture and spaces where they are loved and they're connected to the people around them. And so for us, we know as Christians that the Bible also commands that parents teach their children their ways. And this is not just the Christian faith, it is most faiths globally give parents the duty and the mandate to pass on their religion to their children. And so it is an essential part of being a human to want to pass those rights, to pass your religion to your children. And so this idea of being able to pass on your religion is not merely a social construct, but it is something that is most people of faith hold it to be a divine or to be a divine mandate that they're given by their God. And we believe that we're given by God, and all these faiths hold these similar sentiments. And why the connection between parental rights and religion is the same with parental rights and every other right, whether it was a parent making all kinds of decisions for their children, parents have the right to make those decisions in terms of their religious beliefs, to pass on what we believe God says, to believe who is the final authority, God and not the state are your authority and the final word. To believe how we view science, how we view the world, and how everything is structured around us. So parental rights intrinsically religion, the right to pass on your religion is an intrinsic part of recognizing parental rights. If parents are unable to pass on their religion and their religious views and convictions to their children, they are unable to parent their children. And that's a basic.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct there. The biblical commandment, honor your father and your mother, underscores the sacredness of the parental role. And it is an essential and irreplaceable part of the creation order, so to speak. And again, I think it also goes to the point where you say all faiths have some similar context and understanding of the vital role of parents and the family, is that this is not a state-granted right. It is a pre-political right. It is an inviolable right. It is an inalienable right. And the state, therefore, as we mentioned, has the role, therefore, of protecting and respecting parental rights and certainly not interfering unnecessarily with them and overruling them. And this, again, is why this context is so critical, is that this very trend, this very concern is what is actually starting to unfold before our eyes in a society that we live in at the moment. So, Liesl, I think it would be good to perhaps just get some legal frameworks for this now. So, what are the laws that protect and support parental rights?
Well, Michael, I think the first thing to mention and to underscore is that both South African and international law strongly supports parental rights. It recognizes parental rights, it upholds parental rights. So parents need to understand that. They need to know that the law is on their side. Parents are the primary caregivers and the decision makers for their children, the first educators of their children. So the government's role is basically limited to a supervisory role, a supportive role. The government is not there to replace the parent, to undermine the parent, to usurp the parent. The government simply steps in where parents are unable or unwilling to exercise their parental rights and responsibilities that go with those rights. So let's focus on basic education. In basic education, parental rights means recognizing, respecting that parents are their children's first and primary educators, and they always remain so. And this is captured and confirmed so eloquently in the DBE, Department of Basic Education's 1995 White Paper on Education and Training in a Democratic South Africa, which I'll just refer to as Education White Paper 1. And in the white paper, it says parental guardians have the primary responsibility for the education of their children, and they have the right to be consulted by the state authorities with respect to the form of education, that education should take. They take part in the governance And they have an inalienable right to choose the form of education best for their children, particularly in the early years of schooling, whether provided by the state or not, and of course subject to reasonable safeguards, which may be required by law. And parents' rights to choose includes the choice of language, culture, or religious basis of the child's education, with due regard to the rights of others and the rights of choice of the growing child. So I think it cannot be put more clearly and more strongly than that, an inalienable right, especially in the early years of schooling, the religious and the cultural basis, the right to be consulted and to take part in school governance. So it is recognized, because there's an assumption that parents are the ones best placed to exercise their parental rights in the best interests of their children, that parents know what is in the best interest of their children, not the state. And of course, as we have discussed, parents have this right due to the indisputable and obvious fact that they are indeed their children's parents. And the white paper very importantly confirms, as I said, the parents' right to be consulted. So this places a legal obligation on the state and in basic education, specifically on the Department of Basic Education, to ensure that there's widespread and meaningful public participation when it's developing educational laws, policies, and teaching materials. Especially if those materials have an ideological basis, a worldview basis. In other words, it's not 1 + 1 is 2. It's beliefs, it's value systems, because that goes back to parents' right to determine the religious and the cultural basis of their child's education. And this is in the school context why school governing bodies are so very important. Earlier this year, we had our school governing bodies elections. What do school governing bodies do? They represent the institutional authority of parents in the public school system, because we have public schools. We don't have state schools. Public schools means the school belongs to the community of the school. And the South African School Act requires that in a school governing body, parents always hold the majority voting membership. This ensures that parents determine the culture and the context of the school that their children attend in the best interest of that whole school community. So that's very important. And international law, various treaties that are binding on South Africa emphasize this idea that the family unit is this basic foundational building block of society, that parents have this right to choose the religious basis of their child's education, that they can raise their children according to their own religious beliefs, their own moral values, and that the state and society is required to support parents in this and not to undermine the family.
Yeah, I think this framework of law is so important for parents to understand. In other words, parents must understand that the law is very, very much on your side. And where we are now concerned, of course, is when an erosion starts to come in to something which actually, up until 5 minutes ago, was completely settled in law. And one of the things that, of course, is happening is that there seems to be a growing tension, which is manufactured between the relationship of parental rights and children's rights, and it frames around the best interests of children. So, Nubu, maybe you could just unpack that a little bit for us so we can get a better understanding of where these two intersect and where the, let's say, the area of potential conflict is coming in.
Yes, it's a very strange new type of thinking, I think, this idea of power dynamics. But there's currently a growing area of concern in the way in which children's rights are being approached without considering that the best interests of children are integrally connected to their relationship with their parents. And so if you fail to consider that children's rights, they exist in a proper context, this risks, pitting children up against their parents in what is a power struggle. And this comes from this strange idea that just because somebody is an authority figure over you, that it's somehow inherently bad. And not understanding that power, that's not power, but authority, particularly in the space of children, exists for their protection. Because in healthy families, parents and children, they're all in one team and everybody plays a different role. Because children are more vulnerable, they depend on their parents' authority and power in order to protect them, to provide for them, to make sense of the world for them. And parents are, they are captaining a team, so to speak, but it's not necessarily a question of oppressed and oppressor. Children are not being oppressed by their parents. They're being parented, they're being raised, they're being disciplined, they're being discipled. And this idea of oppression and patriarchy, which are very real and true in certain contexts, is very concerning to bring that into the relationship between a parent and their children, especially for the purposes where the children's rights require the state to intervene. And what is ironic is that the state is exerting its power over parents, right? The idea of the state as the supreme guardian of children is that we understand that there is a need for an authority to protect children only in the event where parents are unable to do so. The state exerts its authority within the bounds and limits and confines of the law. And that is the exact same thing that parents do. They love their children, they take care of their children, and they use that power and authority for what is best for children. The best interests of the child are actually intrinsically linked to what is best for parents. If we look at previous case law in South Africa, when considering this in the case of whether it was giving bail or prison sentences, when the courts consider what is the best interest of the child in relation to the parent, what has always been clear is the presence of the parent, the authority of the parent, has always been what is best for children, and not removing children from their parental home or family. And that's not what is best for children.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point made. The state should actually be the, if you like, the protector of last resort for children. They step in when everything else has failed within the family context, so to speak, or when obviously children are in imminent danger or have suffered violence. Sure, there's a measure to which they do, but that should certainly not be the default position, that the state somehow is just waiting in the wings to just get in and get involved when it decides that parents aren't perhaps doing a good enough job. Which again, Liesl, that perhaps brings us to a question which you can give us some examples of, both maybe internationally and locally. But what are some of the ways that parental rights are in danger of being eroded?
Well, Michael, internationally, one of the controversial issues is, of course, comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE. And this is also a local issue because CSE is being taught in South African schools. Of course, parents should know that they have the right to opt out their child from the CSE component of the life orientations and life skills curriculum. But South Africa as a country has signed onto the Education Plus initiative, which was launched by 5 United Nations agencies in 2019. And this initiative includes there should be universal access to CSE and so-called sexual and reproductive health rights and the services related to those rights, which we obviously would include abortion services. And it's based on UNESCO's highly controversial International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education. And this guidance has been strongly criticized because it has a very liberal value system. And it's a type, and the type also the type of CSE that it recommends, the views and the values implicit, I think sometimes explicit, but implicit in this guidance and the type of CSE it recommends is strongly at odds with even the majority of parents, especially those who are religious parents, traditional religious, culturally traditional parents, and that they want to teach their children. So that is very concerning. And just on a more practical note, a review of the effect of this teaching material in schools have found it does not provide the benefits it's supposed to provide, and it might actually be harmful and have detrimental consequences. So there are very real and serious concerns around CSE. And what is highly problematic and dystopian even is when the state forgets its legal obligation, which is to support and protect families, basically to be the champion of families. And then it moves to this position where, as Norba says, it might exert its power over families, and it decides to step in and just say, but we know what is best for families, we know what is best for children, and if parents are not doing what we as the state believe they should be doing, we're going to take away their children because we are going to be a better job. And there have been instances, we'll refer to an international example where children have been removed from their parents' care because the parents don't have the same ideological view that the state has. They might have a traditional, a cultural view or a Christian view. And they've been removed from parents who are on the facts, loving and well-meaning, because the state saw the parents' beliefs and practices to be harmful to their children. And the specific example I want to mention is the case of a Romanian couple who was living in Norway, and they have 5 children. And the youngest is only 3 months old, still being breastfed, and their children were taken away without prior notification, simply taken away by the Norwegian Child Welfare Services in Norway. About 3% of the children are taken away by these services, so they do apparently have a bit of a problem. And this family was only reunited after 7 months. Think about, the children were not even placed in the same home. They were placed in separate homes. And think about that connection that that young baby should have had with his or her mother. I don't know if the child is a boy or girl. And this case was an ongoing case, but the family has luckily been reunited. They've moved, basically fled out of Norway. They're in Romania at the moment. But what started this whole saga, this whole drama? Well, the 2 eldest children, I believe daughters, they were at school, and teacher overheard that they received occasional spankings at home. And their teacher reported this. And then the Norwegian Child Welfare Services investigated. But the same head teacher said, this is a loving family, well-meaning parents, but she did mention that she might feel that the family's strong Christians' beliefs might retard the children's development. And the children were taken away. But to show the irony of this, when the state welfare services showed up at the school without prior notification to just take the children away, the head teacher actually tried to hide the children, not identify them, not allow the welfare services access to the school premises. But luckily, eventually, the family was reunited. But I think a lot of harm has been done. The children, for example, were not allowed to speak in Romanian to each other. They didn't attend any church services while they were away from their family. But what is very disconcerting about this is that the state is in this position, took this stance that we know better than parents what is right for their children. And if parents don't toe the line, we will just show up without notification and take people's children. That's an incredible overstepping of the line. If you think of international law treaties that say the family is this foundational unit, and the state has a supportive role, and parents religious freedom rights to raise their own children according to their own religious beliefs and cultural values. So that's an example that happened there. And in South Africa, where this has become real, in September 2019, the Constitutional Court declared spanking or any form of physical chastisement illegal in South Africa. Even the lightest slap on the wrist, it's illegal. There's no common law defense of reasonable and moderate chastisement. So that means parents in South Africa can potentially be in the same situation. And that opens a door to a very concerning scenario where the state decides, we know better than you to interpret your religious texts, we know better than you what is in the best interests of children, and to discipline your children. Of course, nobody is condoning child abuse or violence against children. That has always been illegal and should be illegal. But what about loving parents? And Nobu was discussing this important thing that what is the best for the child is this loving relationship and being close to the parent and the cohesion of the family. It will do incredible damage if a child is taken away from a loving parent because of something like this. So that is a concerning trend.
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest concerns is the speed with which these interventions have taken place in other contexts. In other words, it's not as if there's been some sort of detailed investigation and inquiry or what have you. It's been almost like the default position is grab the kids, separate them from each other, from the parents, break up the cultural context, the faith context in which they have been raised, and then thereafter maybe we allow the family to reunite months later. But imagine the psychological damage that's been done, the harm that's been done in the meantime. And Noah, just maybe give us another example, because there was a story of a mother who lost custody of a transgender child for insisting that her biological daughter was a girl, and that was in the American context. Maybe you can just give some details on that if you could.
Yes, and unfortunately, the story doesn't have so far the best ending like the Romanian family who have since been reunited. But it is a mother in Chicago, and she had sole majority custody essentially of her daughter, and she says that they had a great relationship. And this is a mother who considers herself by all metrics of measurement a radical liberal feminist mother. And when her 12-year-old child came and then said that she was experiencing gender dysphoria and wanted to identify as a boy, the mother did not immediately affirm that decision, I guess. And in fact, the child, because of shared custody, the child then went to the father. And this issue of transgender then became the battleground in which a secondary custody agreement has since been met. This child was taken away from the mother because the mother refused to simply affirm this, what she, as a parent, saw as a sudden, unexpected revelation that this person desires to identify with a gender other than the one that they were born with. And the mother did not have any intentions of not supporting her child, of not walking through with her child, but she simply did not want to affirm what looked like a sudden decision and to take steps to give the child the help and support that she needs. And the mother has always been very clear with that, is that if my 12-year-old girl who has always presented as a girl and feminine comes to me and says that they're a boy, I'm not just going to automatically believe that, and I'm not just going to suddenly switch and change that. However, that story was what then determined and changed the custody arrangement. The girl was taken away from her mother. She now lives with her father and her stepmother, and the mother has no contact with her child. Right now, she's only allowed to contact her via mail, and the father now has retained full custody of the child. And I think a key thing that sticks out to me about the story and this mother's resilience is that in order to protect her child, she negotiated that she would not continue to contend for custody as long as they agreed to not have any surgeries made or any puberty blockers given to the child or any medical changes made on her child. And that is the sacrificial love of her mother, because she firmly believes that children need a minute. There is a lot of stuff happening in their bodies. We all remember what it was like to be a teenager. If the government recognizes that you cannot get a tattoo at a certain age, you cannot vote, you cannot have a gun, you cannot drink alcohol, because we as a society recognize that their brains are still developing, their bodies are still coming, and people are coming to know themselves. A lot of butch gay women will tell you that they presented themselves as male and wanted to be boys, but then later on, you become more comfortable in your body. And this is what the mother was fighting for. She was fighting for her child to have the childhood experience of disconnectedness to your body and coming to a place where you are then able to find, when you're older, to come into your own self as a person, as a woman. And I think what the story tells us is parents who are fighting for logic, a mother who is fighting for reason, who is fighting for her child to be protected, was simply taken away from her. There was no consideration that therapy, intervention. Prior to this event, there has been absolutely no report of any abuse, neglect. There was no evidence of an unloving mother. And for her to lose all custody and contact with a child over this battleground issue, this ideological issue, is shocking and should concern all parents, because children are so susceptible to being influenced and in their thinking, that when this child grows up to be an adult, we don't know what story she'll tell of her experiences with her identity. And I can almost guarantee that she'll probably thank her mother for this fight.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, as the mother is fighting, she's lost custody of her child as she fights for her child's identity.
Yeah, I mean that is a shocking example. I mean, they're both shocking examples, but I think this particular one with the mother and the child, the transgender child, is, as you say, very significant because it does show the almost innate love and the sacrificial love that parents have for their children. The fact that she was willing to basically waive her custody. Wow, what a sacrifice for a mother to be separated from their child for that length of time. It just is an indication of how important it is that we do protect and respect parental rights, because that is where the primary and the key relationship lie. And for, again, states to take any position that intervenes in that relationship and starts to subvert the roles and the values and the mores and the norms that parents want to pass on is really problematic. And these are, we've also been dealing with this here in South Africa. Maybe you can give us an example of where parental rights are being eroded in South Africa, even today.
Yes, Michael, unfortunately, yes, parental rights are being eroded in South Africa. A key area of contestation regarding parental rights in the education space is who ultimately determines and decides the curriculum that children learn, and the way that it's being done and some of the materials that are coming through will effectively drive a wedge between children and their parents, undermining the social cohesion of the family. And we know that strong families form the fabric and the basis of society. And it's definitely not in the best interest of children if there's a separation between them and their parents. So specifically, what I would like to mention is the ECE toolkit, the Early Childhood Education Toolkit. Now, this is a toolkit that is already being rolled out in at least 5 provinces. It is aimed at children in the ECD pre-primary and primary school sectors, so children's aged 0 to 9 years. And it's a teacher training material, but obviously the teachers who are trained take this content that they've learned, this approach to teaching, into the classroom with them. So ultimately it affects children because it will create a context and culture in the classroom. And our concern is that this introduces transgender ideology into the classroom for very young children. This toolkit was funded by a 40 million rand donation from a Belgian organization. So it's also, there's a question about, is this Western values and views being exported, enforced in Africa, where the African Charter on the Rights and the Welfare of the Child says that there's an obligation on the state to promote positive African values and traditional morals and cultures. So that is an important question. But the DBE has said, that the ECE toolkit, it's simply internal teacher training material. It's aimed at combating harmful gender stereotypes and combating gender-based violence, bullying. On the face of it, those are all very good things. But who will these, like I said, who will the teachers be teaching the children, and what will they be teaching the children? And that's where the crux of the matter lies. It introduces ideological content, and we know that schools in South Africa, public schools, institutions, and that trickles down to ECD centers, public ECD centers, etc. They should be ideologically neutral. So that doesn't mean there's no place for worldviews, there's no place for ideology, there's no place for religion. It simply means that one religious view, one ideological view cannot be preferred or imposed to the marginalization or exclusion of others. And this is what this toolkit does. It presents a singular view, a radical view, a controversial view on sex and gender, that sex and gender exists on a continuum, so that it's not binary. And it presents, and it doesn't mention any other worldviews, and parents are not consulted. Earlier I spoke about the white paper on education that says parents have the right to be consulted. Parents have the right to choose the religious and cultural basis of their children's education, especially in the early years of schooling. This ECE toolkit flies in the face of all of that. It flies in the face of all of that. But let's look at the content of the toolkit. It says, for example, that the goal of the training is to help the little children break free from harmful gender stereotypes that hold them back in life. And to kind of get, and that many families and communities hold to prevailing harmful gender roles and boundaries, and that children have to, in some sense, to break free from this. it says that there are lots of ways to be boys or girls or something else. Isn't that great? But these are very young children. They're forming their identity. They're forming their relationship to the world. Is this really helpful for young children? Of course, we're doctrinally neutral, we're faith neutral. But there are very serious questions about what is the effect of content such as this on children when we say to boys and girls that, no, you're not necessarily a boy or a girl. You can't tell somebody's gender just by looking at them. Most people you can. That we can use they or them, because that will teach us that we can't assume somebody's gender, as I said, by looking at them, that children from a young age are being asked by the teacher should ask the children, what pronoun would you like to be identified with? There's no mention that any of this is done in consultation or with the support or the permission of the parents. Will this not create a lot of confusion in children? So that's very concerning. And it goes back to this trend that we have mentioned or alluded to, with the state coming in and saying, we will decide what is best and we will impose our view, despite, on paper, strong protections for parental rights, strong protections for religious freedom. And what this will do is, when you drive this wedge between children and their parents, that is not in the best interest of a child. And really it would harm a child's actually their sense of identity and their cultural heritage and their religious heritage. And these are very young children. When you look at some of the content of the toolkit, it's like this is not age appropriate even, perhaps for such very young children. And these are questions that adults struggle with. So that is definitely concerning. And I mean, as 4SA, we have approached the department with a coalition of religious leaders from various faith groups, Christian, Muslim, African traditional spirituality faiths, with recommendations asking, please open this up for a public consultation process so that the vast variety, the diversity of family values and religious views and cultural views in South Africa are represented in the basic education sector. And to date, basically, our concerns and our recommendations have been disregarded. So that definitely is quite concerning.
Yeah, no, that is deeply concerning. And I think really where I think we hit the nail on the head is that you have a situation whereby the state is stepping in and actually almost saying to parents, we know better than you. You know, it's interesting that one of the comments that was in the response that the Department of Basic Education gave to the concerns expressed by the coalition of religious leaders that approached them was that they, the state, felt that parental rights can in fact be limited, and that in any event, they have the right to, as they put it, supplement parental values with constitutional values. Effectively, what they're saying is they will simply override what parents are teaching, or they'll certainly believe that they have the right to teach something that is in conflict to the views and values of the vast majority of parents. So that is really state intervention at a very deep and concerning level. But the state typically does not have the right to impose any ideology into the public education system, least of all when it actually subverts the rights of parents to pass on their values. It's actually contrary, ironically, to their own stated and established policy. But that is, again, I think, the situation that we're facing and why it is so important that we now pick up this issue. And it's very much going to be an issue that 4SA are focusing on for the next coming season, and other institutions similar to us around the world, organizations, are deeply concerned about the erosion that's taking place. And of course, what we must now be is proactive to make sure that we reinforce parental rights in South Africa and obviously beyond. So, Nubu, maybe you could just give, because we've obviously had some discussions on this, just give an outline of what we are working towards to help parents understand their rights, and also to make sure that they understand clearly their responsibilities, but also to reinforce this whole area of parental rights.
One of the things that we are currently working on right now is a Charter of Parental Rights and Responsibilities. And our thinking is that this charter will empower parents by clearly outlining their rights and responsibilities in South Africa, and particularly within the education system. Because parents have an inherent and inalienable right to direct their children's education and pass on their beliefs. And just because children parents drop off their children at school, they're not relinquishing their parental rights. They're not saying, they're not handing their children over to the state to educate and indoctrinate their children outside of the parental rights and consent. And so that's essentially what it is. And the government's own policies, the white paper that Liesl spoke about before, even recent DBE strategies and policies, they emphasize the duty and the rights and responsibilities of parents, because there is recognition in research throughout studies, proper scientific understanding that if parents are involved in their children's education, you're likely to have greater outcomes. The more involved the parent is, the more they buy into what their child is learning, and the more likely that their child is going to succeed in the education system. And so a Charter of Parental Rights that is in line with the Constitution and international law obligations will ensure that parents are actually fully aware of their rights and responsibilities regarding their children's education. And we want parents to be able to make informed decisions and be actively participating in their children's education, whether this is through education policies, what type of curriculum material is going to be taught, and the direction that the school is going to take in terms of teaching children things, morality and how they engage and interact with the world. And so a Charter of Parental Rights and Responsibilities will be able to make sure that parents understand this. And one of the things that this charter will have that will be key is parents will also understand their own responsibilities, because we understand that they have the rights to guide and direct their children. But having such a charter that has input from a broad sector will ensure that parents also understand that if their children are, suffering with bullying at school or gender dysphoria or any of these issues, parents, being the primary caregivers, will understand what their responsibilities are to react to that, how to engage with that, and the type of resources that parents need in order to be able to support and help their children, and not simply to relinquish their children to the state to deal with what are very big and confusing issues in early childhood spaces. And so we know that the best interest of the child are of paramount importance in every matter concerning the child, and the Charter of the Parental Rights is one of the things that is essential, because as we stated before, the best interests of the child exist under other rights, such as parental rights. And it will ensure that children have a holistic approach to child development, and their emotional, social, and cultural aspects are respected. And, one of the things that is key once we have this Charter of Parental Rights, and in the process of making it, is ensuring that a second thing that we're doing is ensuring that parents understand their rights and responsibilities and are aware in terms of the education system. And I think what we really need to be very clear about is we are not opposed to, we don't support bullying. We do not support any child being made to feel like they do not belong in the school system. And we want all children to feel safe and to thrive and to be what is in their best space for them to grow. And one of these things, and our key contention, is that parents know best what that environment looks like for their children. And so we really want parents to be able to engage, to be, whether if it's in a school, particularly we want them to participate in school governing bodies, to train and educate parents on how they can participate in SGBs directing their children's education. And we will also create resources for parents to know and understand how they can exercise their parental rights, and resources that they can access in ensuring that their children are given, the best start, and that the parents are empowered to be able to do this. And we are hoping that you will have the state coming to the party as well, because this is why departments like Social Development and Department of Basic Education are there to support and bolster parents, not to usurp them, to support parents and ensure that they're able to fulfill their rights and responsibilities to their children. And so through whether it's webinars, publications, education information sessions, conversations like this, we hope to ensure, our aim is to ensure that parents understand what are their rights and what are their responsibilities. So through public participation, public engagement, and through the creation of a somewhat soft binding a charter of parental rights and responsibilities.
No, that is excellent. So I think as we wrap up our conversation, I think to parents, the message would be to wake up in a sense, because do not take your parental rights for granted. You need to exercise them, but you also need to understand the responsibilities that come with them, and to really get engaged at this point in time in the lives of your children, in the life of the world in which they're growing up in, to make sure that your rights as parents are respected and protected. And that's also where, of course, we would call upon government at the same time to play its vital role in making sure that this happens. So thank you so much, Noble, Liesl, for your input. We trust, for those who are watching this, that you have found this interesting, even enlightening. Please do follow us. There's plenty more information that we put out on a constant basis. We have a website, forsa.org.za. That's the Freedom of Religion, or FORSA website. We have a Facebook page, Freedom of Religion SA. We have a YouTube channel that you probably found if you're watching this video. And do sign up for our newsletter. And please do support us. We need the donations that you give so that we can continue to do the work that we do to protect and promote all our religious freedom rights. And of course, very significantly and importantly in this particular moment, we're focusing on parental rights. So thank you very much indeed. And we look forward to seeing you the next time.